Annalena Baerbock, the new president of the General Assembly, has already questioned the world body, asking where is the UN which was created to save us from hell? I sat down with her to explore that question and the challenges the UN's facing during its 80th anniversary year. I'm Frank Ucciardo, and you're watching TRT World One-on-One. Annalena Baerbock, the President of the General Assembly. Thank you for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, you come to your position as President of the General Assembly at a pivotal moment in the history of the United Nations, with wars in Ukraine and Gaza and conflicts in Africa. How does your theme of Better Together begin to address these issues?
To make clear that none of these challenges you just described can be solved by a single nation alone, and that also the richest and strongest country in the world are always better together, because besides the horrible wars going on, also other global challenges like climate crisis, or as we have seen with the pandemic, a pandemic doesn't know any passport, any borders, so no single nation can solve these kind of global challenges alone, and this is why all of us are better together.
Now, as you know, recently an independent panel of the UN came out with a report saying that genocide was committed against Palestinians in Gaza. Your reaction?
It is important that we do have these independent bodies, but also the ICJ looking into these matters, because the situation in Gaza is unacceptable. Seeing people searching for their children in the ruins of their homes, knowing that hundreds, if not thousands of children are wandering around in these ruins without parents left. The humanitarian situation is a disaster. And for all of that reason, it was so important that the vast majority of countries underlined in the New York Declaration that we have to come to a ceasefire and towards a pathway towards peace and a two-state solution.
Madam President, 142 countries just voted for a declaration of a peaceful settlement on the question of Palestine and the implementation of a two-state solution. What kind of signal does that send to the world?
That the United Nations is alive. They took the power of the General Assembly and said, if there is a blockage in the Security Council, then we deal with it in the General Assembly. And I think this is the important role in these times. If we want to bring our United Nations also in the next 8 decades, because we celebrate the 80th anniversary, then we have to make it not only fit for the future. And coming back to the declaration you just mentioned, it makes very clear that the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be solved by war, cannot be solved by occupation, cannot be solved by terror, but only by coming together, working on a ceasefire and a peaceful settlement of this question. And the General Assembly has been always very clear that the future is the two-state solution.
Now, you mentioned the ICJ. These institutions are coming under attack, aren't they?
Yes, and this is why this high-level week, why I said in my opening speech when being sworn in as a president, we are at a crossroad. This is a make-it-or-break-it moment. So in all the big speeches in the high-level week, everybody would say we stand behind the United Nations, the Charter, but we have to live up to the principles of the Charter. And the principles of the Charter are peace and security, that a war of aggression is not allowed, that you're not allowed to occupy in other territories, that human rights are universal, that sustainable development is a right to every nation.
Well, of course, and just ahead of the General Assembly, we have France and Saudi Arabia co-chairing this conference on the New York Declaration and the recognizing basically statehood for Palestine. What do you think of that placement in time?
This has been a long-standing call. So this call for a two-state solution to underline that Israel has a right of security like every country in the world, but Palestinians have also right to their own state, to dignity and self-determination, is a long-standing call of the General Assembly. And it is more important than ever, I would say, to remember that peace is only possible exactly to this two-state solution.
Now, when I was watching your General Assembly speech, you challenged the member states here. I think you shook them up a little because you said, can we celebrate while parents in Gaza are watching their children starve, while Afghan children are banned from school and prevented from having a normal childhood? You've been championing women's rights all your career, haven't you?
Well, we also celebrate 30 years of the so-called Beijing Declaration when Hillary Clinton said this famous sentence, women rights are human rights. And this is all what the United Nations is about, with a universal declaration on human rights. And half of the population in the world are women and girls. And it's not only a question of justice towards women and girls, it's also a question of the strength of a society, because you can see even in economic figures, if women and girls are not participating equally with education, but also with regard to work, you have also a loss in GDP. So I would even say it's also the self-interest of every country for progress that we deliver also on this promise of the United Nations 30 years ago, that women rights are human rights, not only on paper, but that we see these rights established also in reality. So in 8 decades, 80 years long, I'm only the fifth female president of the General Assembly, and we have never had a Secretary General being a woman. So in the Pact for the Future, there is also a line of saying that this is kind of an abnormal situation, that in 80 years time one hasn't found one woman out of 8 billion women around the world.
The critical issue of climate change has been obscured amid all this news today of war and conflicts. That must be frustrating to you because it really is the planet's future.
We have seen this horrible fires destroying homes, destroying lives in every continent of the world. We've seen it here in the United States when we saw in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in California burning. We have seen it in Europe, in Spain, with the fires. We have obviously seen not only fires, but we have seen this horrible drought on the African continent. And again, I would look at the positive side. I remember very well, because I've been there attending that conference in Paris. It was exactly also 10 years ago, 2015, the climate conference in Paris. We had the failure after failure with climate conferences, not agreeing on anything. But then the international community found that strength of saying, this is one of the biggest challenges we can only face together. And back then, nobody spoke about renewable energies, spoke about what the answers are. But today we see all over the world, also with support of the UN, that the installation also for renewable energies in areas where electricity hasn't been before, it was not only an answer to fight the climate crisis, but also to sustainable development.
Now, I want to ask you, at a recent press conference, you were asked to correct misleading information from social media. In my opinion, social media is pretty much the worst judge and jury out there in the world today. And, it was involving remarks that you made about civilian facilities and hospitals that could possibly lose their legal protection status and be attacked if they're used for military purposes. You didn't condone attacking these facilities, obviously, right?
I said over and over again, also in the past, that international humanitarian law is clear. Civilians and civilian places have to be protected, full stop. And this is also about the credibility of these dear institutions, that in war times, even in war times, we have rules, and this is a protection of civilians. And this is again why at this moment it is so important that we do have for Gaza this ceasefire, because many civilian places are being destroyed. There are no safe spaces to go to, and therefore the ceasefire is the thing what we have to not only work on but deliver at this moment.
One time you said that Russia's war in Ukraine marks a new reality, and you've been a staunch ally of Ukraine. How do you see a possible path to resolving this?
The majority of countries made very clear that it's a breach of international law to start a war of aggression, that every country has a sovereign right about their own territory, and Ukraine is part of the international community. And if there's a breach of international law, it has been named by the General Assembly and by the Security Council. But if there is a veto by a member of Security Council, again, it falls in the hands of the General Assembly to address this issue, put exactly this question on its agenda, that we have to come to peace negotiations, to peace talk, to install also for Ukraine their sovereign right of their own territory.
In closing, I want to ask you a bit of a personal question. Growing up in the 1980s in Europe and watching the Berlin Wall fall and communist regimes fall, how did that shape who you are today? What went through your heart and mind then that influenced your desires to be where you are sitting today?
I was 8 at the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I would say, unfortunately, because as a kid, I didn't really realize this historical moment. But traveling around the world as a foreign minister in many conflict zones, people asked me, so how could you overcome this divide? And back then, I always thought this was really a miracle. And even though in politics you shouldn't dream about miracles alone, but I think it's a very strong remembrance also for myself that in the darkest hours, diplomacy and international relations is all about working every day when you think there's no light at the end of the tunnel, because miracles can happen. And when this day happened, you know why you worked for 1 year, sometimes even for decades, for this moment of peace to come true. And this is what has guided me throughout also the last year and also throughout these times, that in the darkest hours, we should never give up, but always try to even work harder, because, I mean, people in conflict zones, they get up every day to save their children's life. And this is why we should never resign, but deliver on the promises of this dear institution.
Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, congratulations and thank you for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you very much.